Welcome to Power Play on this Thursday. I'm Vashi Capellos in Ottawa. Tonight, Trump shuffles his inner circle as Canadians wait for Carney's Oval Office moment.
Well, I think it exemplifies the continuing chaos in Donald Trump's national security decision-making.
In moments, our conversation with former Trump National Security Advisor and George W. Bush UN Ambassador John Bolton on the U.S. president taking embattled National Security Advisor Mike Waltz out of the White House, moving the Special Forces veteran over to the UN. We'll also get Ambassador Bolton to weigh in on the Prime Minister's meeting with Donald Trump. Then, Pierre Poilievre is set to face his caucus. Conservatives will gather Tuesday right here in Ottawa. What's in store for their seatless leader? We're going to dig into that with a special front bench panel of former politicians. Christy Clark, Monty Silberg, and Nathan Cullen will be here. Plus, Data Deep Dive. Pollster David Coletto digs into the major shifts among voters. The headline outcome of the election may not be too much of a change, but what happened below the surface signifies something more. That conversation is coming up a little bit later on in the show. First, though, I'm going to start tonight with some breaking news on the federal election after Election Canada's validation process resulted in the riding of Terrebonne, just north of Montreal, flipping. The Bloc Québécois is now up one seat in the overall seat count, and the Liberals are down one. The validation process showed the Bloc won the riding by just 44 votes. And because that is under the 60-vote threshold, that means there will be an automatic recount. So until that recount is complete, here's where it all leaves the makeup of the House of Commons. 168 seats now for the Liberals, which is 4 seats shy of a majority. 144 for the Conservatives, 23 for the Bloc Québécois, 7 for the NDP, and 1 for the Greens. That recount comes as we are learning Prime Minister Mark Carney will address Canadians publicly for the first time since his election night speech tomorrow morning here in Ottawa. He's going to hold a press conference. It's expected he'll be able to say more at that press conference about meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump. Trump this week said the two would get together in Washington within the next week, and that meeting comes at a time the president is under some of the most intense pressure of his second term in office. Just over 100 days in, he's booted his national security advisor, Mike Waltz, naming him ambassador to the United Nations.
Can you help us understand why this reshuffle is happening, or what it says about the administration's policy priorities that these moves are taking place?
I think what it says is what his first term said to people, is this is a man who is very active, day-to-day, involved, knows what he wants to accomplish. Things also sometimes change. I'm not going to guess at the decisions President Trump makes. What we do know is the results of those decisions. Clearly, this is the president's decision, and he made it for a reason, and I trust him, and the American people will see the results.
Waltz was embroiled in that so-called Signal scandal, wherein top members of the Trump team texted each other war plans, including a journalist in the text group, by mistake. He's the first member, though, of the administration to be shown the door. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will take over for Waltz until a new NSA is announced. Trump's polling numbers 100 days in aren't great either. His tariffs have brought the U.S. economy essentially to a halt. So what exactly is Canada and Mark Carney walking into when the Prime Minister heads to D.C.? John Bolton was Trump's national security advisor at one time, also served as the ambassador to the UN under President George W. Bush. Hi, Ambassador. Welcome back to the program. Thank you very much for making the time.
Glad to be with you.
I have a number of questions on the latest between Canada and the U.S., but I have to start off, of course, on this breaking news today about the person who serves in a role you used to serve in, the National Security Advisor, now becoming basically the first person at that echelon to exit their role. I know he's headed to become another role that you occupied, the Ambassador to the United Nations, but what does that exit say to you?
Well, I think it exemplifies the continuing chaos in Donald Trump's national security decision-making. This is obviously very unusual. In Trump's first term, his very first national security advisor, Mike Flynn, lasted for 22 days. Mike Waltz has lasted for 102 days, so that's some improvement. But, it's the kind of job that stability in office and being able to keep the wheels of decision-making moving smoothly, constant turnover and confusion in responsibilities leads to inadequate decision-making. And there are a lot of pressing issues in the world today. This is not part of the original plan, let's be clear.
You understand what it's like to serve in that role. In layman's terms, what is it supposed to function like, and what does it function like under Trump?
Well, the national security advisor should be responsible for ensuring that the president has before him, when he confronts important foreign and defense policy decisions, he has all the pertinent information, that he has the chance to absorb, that he knows what the options are, that he knows the pros and cons of the options, so that he can make the most informed decision possible. And then when the decision is made through the NSC process, to ensure that the bureaucracy carries out the president's decision. That's not the way it works in the Trump administration, as I found in the opening weeks, really, of my time there. He is not disciplined by information, options, consideration of the implications of decisions or their pros and cons. He operates on whim. He is totally transactional, episodic, ad hoc. And it's very hard to keep the machinery of government running. It's not an easy job for anybody in any of the top national security positions in a Trump administration. And what we've just seen happen over the past 3 months, and what we're seeing happening today in particular, I think demonstrates very clearly.
Why do you think Mike Waltz was the first one to get removed? Like, why do you think ultimately he is the one to in a way, take the fall?
Well, it's not a question of fairness or anything like that. I think most people felt that after the Signal chat group issue broke and people learned what had happened, that Washington observers would have said Waltz's time in office was short. But Trump obviously didn't want to have a repetition of the Mike Flynn problem and be a story in the first 100 days. Trump wanted the first 100 days to be a record of success. Well, it wasn't a record of success on many grounds. And so now on day 102, safely past the first 100, this is broken out in the open. But I think most people thought Waltz would hang on for another couple months, and then they'd announce he wanted to spend more time with his family or something like that. The switch to the UN, I believe, was totally unpredicted by anybody. And I believe it could have been another ad hoc decision Trump reached, maybe even this morning, once the story of Waltz's departure had leaked out.
You mentioned 102 days in where sort of things sit with the president at this point. If you look at public opinion polling, for example, if you look at the slowdown in the economy, the impact of both the imposition of tariffs, but also the threat of even more severe ones, I am wondering if you think that provides any kind of opening for Canada as we get set to embark on, I don't know what I can call them, negotiations, conversations, something, a new relationship with a new prime minister.
Well, I think the most important thing in dealing with Trump is appreciating that he sees international relations as a function of his personal relationship with a foreign head of state. So if he has good personal relations with a foreign leader, then in his view, the U.S. has good state-to-state relations with that country. That's not my view. I think is vastly oversimplified, but it is the fact that Trump didn't like Justin Trudeau, and that's why he enjoyed trolling him, calling him Governor Trudeau, and talking about Canada as the 51st state. I don't know that he met Mark Carney before Carney became prime minister. They did have one phone call at least after that. It apparently went fairly well, respectfully. Very hard to predict what Trump's relationship with anybody will be, but it's certainly possible given Carney's background. They could have a professional relationship, and a lot will simply turn on that. How well did the two of them get along? It will turn on that in Trump's mind in any event.
There's sort of a live conversation here about what the next number of months looks like, insofar as will there be a negotiation of sorts. That's the way that the prime minister has termed it. The other party that was competing to win government was saying, we should start renegotiating NAFTA right away. NAFTA was in place, the new NAFTA, CUSMA or USMCA was in place and contravened by the actions of President Trump. What is your best advice to Canada about that? Like, should we pursue a different agreement that he can just break again?
Well, I think the most important thing is to recognize that although it may seem like a long time, Trump only has 45 months left. The world will last longer than the end of the Trump administration. And if I could give Prime Minister Carney a little free advice, I think he took a wrong turn in his victory speech the night of your election when he said that the relationship with the United States would never be the same again, and spoke very negatively about the United States and the views that it held, when what he really meant to say was the views that Donald Trump holds. The vast majority of the American people, the vast, overwhelming majority, never had the slightest interest in making Canada the 51st state. And many of them, I would say a clear majority, don't agree with what he's done on the tariff policy, specifically with respect to Canada and Mexico, our partners in North America. So I would say to the Prime Minister, you can have whatever view you want of Donald Trump. I certainly have my view, and I'm sure he will have his. But do not say that Trump is equivalent to the United States. Do not equate the people of the United States and their views with Donald Trump. I think if you fix that, you'll be off to a really good start.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Ambassador Bolton, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
Former National Security Advisor John Bolton there. We're going to talk about what he said and that upcoming meeting with, between, I should say, Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Trump, as well as the fact that CTV has confirmed Pierre Poilievre will face his caucus next week, Tuesday, at an all-day event here in Ottawa. They'll all be here in person. Will he stay or will he go as leader? Our front bench is set to talk about all of that after a short break. Christy Clark, Monty Solberg, and Nathan Cullen. There they are. Back in a moment.
Pierre is a fighter, and he's doing it for the people who have been left behind for this government. That's really what inspires him. You can't simultaneously say we push people away when we got more votes. That's just factually incorrect. That doesn't work on a mathematical level. I don't know what else to say. I mean, we got more votes, we got a higher percentage, we won more seats. Clearly, we weren't pushing people away. We reached historic highs. That's just a nonsensical statement that doesn't hold up to a second's worth of scrutiny.
That's Conservative MP-elect Andrew Scheer and former leader of the party on this program, defending Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and criticism towards their party over its federal election results. The Conservative caucus is set to meet Tuesday all day here in Ottawa in person, and they sure have a lot to talk about. If Poilievre stays as leader, where does he get a seat and when, since he lost his own riding? And though they substantially did increase their vote share, the results of the election were very different from what was predicted for the party at the start of this year. Let's bring in the front bench to talk about that. Former Liberal BC Premier Christy Clark is here. She's a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Former federal Conservative cabinet minister and MP Monty Solberg is with us. He's the CEO of New West Public Affairs. And former NDP MP and BC Minister Nathan Cullen is with us. He's now a senior advisor at Strategy Corp. Hi, everybody. It's very nice to see you. Monty, I was just getting some details on caucus, and the first part of it will involve basically a vote on whether or not to use the Reform Act. If they vote in favor of it, that means that they then are able to trigger sort of like an internal leadership review. My sense is that there isn't a whole lot of interest among MPs to do that. I'm wondering what your sense is.
Well, I've, canvassed a number of people, and I don't get a sense that people are anxious to remove Pierre. They probably feel he made some mistakes. He probably owes the caucus a bit of an explanation, but he also did some things that were very good. He's built the party up. He's really, reached out to all kinds of new people and achieved some historic numbers. So he's really got a good case to make as well as to why to stay. But of course, ultimately, he's got to find a seat in order to really be effective as the leader of the opposition.
How do you think the fact that he doesn't have a seat, Christy, complicates the entire conversation about his future as leader of the party?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One is he looks like a loser for not getting his own seat. I mean, it's kind of one of those things that everybody remembers, because and it will highlight for people. He lost track of what the actual issues were in the election. And the issues were not Justin Trudeau; it was Donald Trump. He did, he lost his own seat. He ended up, I think, kind of with a terrible campaign message. He just couldn't get himself over the top. Even though, as Monty said, he got more votes and did better than most other previous Conservative government leaders before him. So I think it's going to be I think for the moment, the caucus is going to rally, because that's what they need to do in the face of, this what I'm sure is a devastating loss for for most Conservatives. On the other hand, though, I think it's just, I mean, it's only a couple of years probably until the Conservatives or the NDP decide that they want to force an election. And in that case, you will start to see the knives come out for Pierre Poilievre in a very, very big way. Jason Kenney, Premier Ford, lots of people out there who are very competent, very able, proven winners who would probably be interested in having that job. And I don't think anybody is going to say, you know what, you lost the last election, but you can win the next one, when there are lots of ambitious people out there who think that they can do a better job.
What do you think his message to caucus, what would you anticipate from his message to caucus, Nathan, on Tuesday? Because there's this sort of interesting thing to reconcile, which is he did lose his seat. We haven't heard from him since that outcome. We heard from him, obviously, on election night. But at the same time, you didn't win the election, but you've got the biggest share of the popular vote that you've had literally since the 80s when Brian Mulroney was winning these massive Conservative governments. Like, how do you square those things for caucus or for Canadians?
Well, how does so much winning look like losing? Right? All of those things you said are true. What Monty said was absolutely correct, that the party improved, but it's against what do you measure success by. And at Christmas, success was government or bust, right? It's kind of like a team in the playoffs that almost makes it. And then the next run, this time I'm in Toronto right now, Vashi, so excuse me if I'm going to use any Leaf metaphors right now. But the idea is that the goal was government. That goal was not achieved. So, and the seat loss, like we all know now, on election night, we wondered, why is Pierre talking so early in the night? He's out on stage, he's doing his speech, and we're together. And they knew they were losing his seat and didn't want that result to be in front of everyone and then have to make that speech to the nation. What does he need to say to caucus? I don't know. I get the sense in talking to some Conservative MPs that the loyalty is still high. There aren't a lot of quote unquote star candidates that Mr. Poilievre recruited in the last election. That's actually a benefit right now. So you don't have all these bruised egos that were getting ready for their various cabinet positions and are now ticked off. Mm-hmm. The people Christy mentioned, they're waiting in the wings, but they're not out chirping. They're not out in public. Well, with a few exceptions, taking on Pierre right now. I don't think they're clamoring for his job. So I think he's probably fine with caucus. Give it a few months. And if the polling's off, if they're down significantly, that's when things start to get a little bit more rumbly as to the question of, is he the right guy for next? He was great at opposition. Then he applied and auditioned for the prime minister job and didn't really pivot into that feeling for a lot of Canadians that this guy could handle the top job. He was a good attack dog, but is he a good leader in terms of the country's desires for what's next? No, apparently not.
I know, Monty, it's just been a few days. And obviously where you are in Alberta, the support for the Conservatives was very high. And again, a record high for them since the 80s. But to Nathan's point, it's very far from where things were projected, which was over 200 seats for the Conservatives just at the beginning of January. When you think about the results, why do you think they ultimately fell short?
Well, there are a few reasons. On the one hand, I think Pierre had a message that did resonate with a chunk of the population. There were clearly two different sort of sets of people or sets of concerns that drove the election outcome. One was affordability, housing, this kind of thing. The other was the narrative around the need to defend Canada against Donald Trump. And in that instance, we didn't pivot fast enough. We didn't make a strong enough case that we could do that. And it fell in the minds of many Canadians to Mark Carney to be that person. So I think we need to bear that in mind going into a new government. I think there's going to be a period of time where the expectation is that parties work together as much as possible to strengthen Canada so that it can withstand the tariff threat and any threats of annexation from Donald Trump. That may mean doing some things that we don't normally see in Parliament, like trying to work together on pieces of legislation or on initiatives. And I think, Canada's expecting some happy warriors right now on all sides. So it may be a different thing that we haven't seen in a very long time in Canada. And I would encourage Pierre Poilievre and my Conservative colleagues to keep that in mind because I think it will be important at some point down the road when we're asked whether or not we contributed to the defense of Canada in the way that we should have.
Christy, you've sat for a long time in the legislature. You know better than, and all three of you would know better than me, Do you think that this moment will lead to something like that, even though it may be against natural instincts in a political arena?
Well, I think it should. I mean, I've won some and I've lost some. Both the same number, by the way, over the years. These are very difficult times for the leader. I have to say my heart goes out to him in some ways. But I do think, Poilievre has not shown the ability to really kind of soften up and take a different tack. This election may be an important learning moment for him, and I hope he takes it, because you're right, Vashi, that is exactly what needs to happen, what Monty Solberg talked about. We need to find some space to try and come together over the most important issues. I'm not naive. I don't think they're not all going to still be fighting and jostling, but the really key things, we need to be united as a country. And a lot of eyes are going to be on Pierre Poilievre to see if he can do that. If he can, I mean, who knows? He might survive to fight another day. I think if he fails to do that, it'll be terrible for Canada. And I think it will probably be his death warrant as leader.
Well, Carney needs to do it too. I would just say that.
Yeah.
I mean, Carney needs to reach out to Conservatives, certainly in Western Canada. I know we're getting to that, Vashi. Sorry to get ahead of it.
That's our whole next segment, I promise. Yeah.
Yeah, but it really is critical that he shows that good faith that we didn't see from the Trudeau government on resource development and that sort of thing, because it can't be a one-way street.
Nathan, sorry, you got to jump in too.
My question, and Monty's not wrong. Mr. Carney is different than Mr. Trudeau. He's not, as he told us 4,500 times in the election, he's not a politician. The House itself, the way Parliament has been conducting itself over the last few years, particularly as it ramped up towards the election, was just unworkable. Who's to blame for it? Well, there's lots of blame to go around. Ironically, not so much towards the NDP, who were trying to get things done, but then suffered in the election for maybe that reason or other reasons. I just don't know if Pierre's got the gear, right? Does he have that phase or ability to be graceful in defeat and magnanimous and understand this larger question that you've raised and that your other guests have spoken to, that we're facing this crisis right now, bickering and sniping. It just got so awful, Vashi. You saw it. It was deeply personal, non-functional. This is not the time for that. Does Pierre have that ability to rise to what's being called upon all members of Parliament right now? We'll see. I guess I'm a little skeptical because I've known him a long time and he's really good at the attack. Let's see if he's good at this other thing, and that might stand him in good stead and might keep him in his job right now if he wants to go for the top job in an election from now.
Let me just follow up very quickly with just a 30-second question, and maybe, Monty, you can answer this. Do you think there's a possibility of caucus pressuring him for a move in that way? Because I interviewed a couple of MPs, for example, this week on my radio program, who actually brought that up proactively, the idea that on an issue-by-issue basis, for example, on energy, if that comes up, like, that they would need to project a different image to Canadians in this moment. Like, can MPs lead him there?
Well, first of all, nobody is ready for the job of Prime Minister. You have to grow into it. It demands things of you that you don't expect before you get that job. So to be successful, you have to grow and you have to find different gears. When it comes to MPs, I think the MPs are equal partners in the success of the Conservative Party of Canada, and they have a right to demand from their leader that he or she grows in a particular way to ensure that they win elections and command the confidence of Canadians. So I think it's only right for MPs to call out their leaders, preferably behind closed doors, so they can have a fulsome discussion, not in front of the national media like we often do. But, really that is something that tells me about whether or not a leader has the humility to really deserve to be the leader of the party.
That's
Monty,
the word right there.
Monty, I want you to
have
get
the
on the phone
humility?
to Danielle Smith right now.
Well, we're gonna talk
We're
about
gonna talk
that
about
in the
her.
next segment. That's a big part of what we're going to talk about. We'll take a quick break. Our entire front bench is sticking around. Back in a moment.
It depends very much on whether we have pragmatic Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney as our Prime Minister, or whether we have environmental extremist, keep it in the ground, phase out fossil fuels author of the book values Mark Carney as Prime Minister? And I don't know the answer to that yet. I don't think Canadians know the answer to that yet, because as I continue to point out, he said different things to different people in different parts of the province or country in different languages. So we won't really know until we see the decisions he's making for cabinet. We won't really know until I've had an opportunity to speak with him, which I will be this week.
That's Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith calling on newly elected Prime Minister Mark Carney to reset the relationship between Ottawa and Alberta. The issue of unity will be one of Carney's main challenges in his new role, along with dealing with U.S. President Donald Trump, of course. Carney is expected to visit the White House soon. An official day, though, has yet to be confirmed. The Prime Minister is also scheduled to hold a press conference tomorrow morning for the first time since winning the election. Let's bring back the front bench, Christy Clark, Monty Solberg, and Nathan Cullen. Christy, I'll throw the first question over to you. We've talked about national unity actually on this show a lot. No secret that there's been some friction between some Western provinces, in particular Alberta and Saskatchewan, and the federal government. It goes both ways. What do you anticipate will or has to change?
Well, first, can I say that's one hell of a welcome? You know, I mean, I've welcomed in as premier a couple of prime ministers, and no matter how I felt about them, I always started with, I'd really like to congratulate person X for becoming Prime Minister of Canada, and I look forward to working together. That's generally what one does. But not what Danielle Smith has chosen to do. I think that gives us a good feel about where she's planning to go here. I think the challenge is twofold. I mean, Danielle Smith has already, as I've said, sort of pointed out the challenge at her end, which is going to be, she's going to be aggressive. She doesn't appear to be looking for real solutions. It's kind of what she wants or nothing. And I think there is a real genuine desire for Mark Carney to really build. And I mean, he said that on election night, build, baby, build. That was part of one of the things he said at most of the campaign stops that he went to. So I think he understands economic growth. He knows that we need to rebuild our relationships with investors who've been disappointed in us, that we need to build infrastructure in cohort with First Nations in order to get our goods to market. We need to shorten the amount of time it takes to get those things going, and we need to build pipelines and those kinds of things to make it work. I think he understands that. It's going to be a difficult dance for him to do, though, because as you said, it's complicated. And I think the challenge for him is going to be, he's elected some, pretty left-wing MPs in his caucus. I mean, guys like Gregor Robertson, who banned the use of natural gas in Vancouver, as an example, aren't going to be guys that are saying, hey, let's build a bigger LNG industry in British Columbia. So I think he's got some challenges on the inside, but I don't doubt his commitment on the inside, because he really understands how the economy works, and he knows that resource development is the biggest part of the puzzle if we want to fix it.
Monty, do you think if he is able to deliver on the kind of rhetoric that he used during the campaign, or even on election night, as Christy said, build, baby, build, in a way that Albertans, and I'm saying, not all Albertans, but a lot of Albertans want to see him do? Like, do you think that will actually change the political relationship between himself and the federal government and the premier? Or is that kind of set in stone because there's a lot of political utility on both sides?
He has to spend some capital with his own cabinet and caucus and say that in order to realize some of the goals we want to realize on climate and on social issues, we need an economy that is going 110%. And that means that a major lever in the economy, oil and gas, needs to be part of that. So he has to make that case vigorously. And, as Christy said, investors have been disappointed in us, which is why Danielle Smith is skeptical about, Mark Carney coming in. Christy's laid out some of the challenges that he faces. So the question is, will he face up to his own cabinet and caucus, make the arguments, and spend the capital in order to bridge the gap that needs to be bridged in Canada so that we can have oil and gas development on the one hand, but start to reduce emissions on the other hand?
Nathan, I could just have like a screen cap of your facial expressions during each of our panels, because they like to, I can see you want to say something. So the floor is yours.
I gotta not play poker with you, Vashi, at any point, because I just can't do the. couple of things. Christie's right. What a warm welcome to the incredibly difficult job of Prime Minister from our friends in Alberta. That's fair. She's going to make her points. I also appreciated that she took no responsibility for having bolted Pierre Poilievre to Donald Trump 2 weeks ago before Election Day, saying they're in sync or something. That was interesting. A couple things. I think Mr. Carney's opportunity is to show, not tell. Mr. Trudeau was great at the narrative, great at storytelling, not so good at delivering things. And I mean just the passport type things, never mind pipelines. Second is don't chase pipeline fantasies. People keep talking about projects that have no proponent. Oh, we should build something to the east, we build something to the west. And you talk to the private sector and they say, well, who's going to foot the bill of actually building this to take oil to that particular part of the place? So spending capital on things that don't exist doesn't make sense. The very last thing I would say is the opportunity for the Liberals right now is to know exactly who it is that they're speaking to. And Canadians are worried. They need a very good counterpoint. We talked about this in our first segment. How do we approach Trump? He needs to stabilize his government. He needs to get a decent agreement, most likely with the NDP, perhaps with the Bloc, but we'll see. And then be able to face Trump on a solid footing. And let's keep talking about the trade diversification, the interprovincial boundaries that we can tear down together. These are very Canada building initiatives that don't suggest things like we're going to suddenly lay down tracks for a diluted bitumen pipeline to the north coast or through Quebec that is burning capital to what end? I mean, we have a pipeline going to Vancouver, through Vancouver right now, and that oil goes down to the United States. It doesn't go to Asia because that's where they're able to process it. So let's focus on where that ambitious energy climate goals. I think that is part of his mandate. I think Mrs. Smith is wrong to say that they have a mandate to just build only petroleum legacy projects. I don't think that's actually a good interpretation of this election that just happened.
I think maybe part of that interpretation, I wouldn't say Premier Smith necessarily, but even among people who voted for the Prime Minister, Christie, is that he often referred to building out capacity to get all types of energy, both conventional and not, to other markets. And I take Nathan's point, particularly around bitumen, for example. But part of the issue with Prime Minister Trudeau was the number of times people came and said, hey, we would look at, for example, LNG. And his assertion was at the time that there wasn't a business case. Prime Minister Carney seems to have indicated during the campaign that he would have some disagreement there. I think that's why people have the impression, maybe not that they're going to build some fantasy pipeline around oil, although that came up at times as well, but that there is some interest in Prime Minister Carney, in his own interest in building out export capacity away from the United States. But it is complicated, as Nathan points out.
It is complicated. There's no doubt about it. But I mean, we're talking about Alberta's oil, BC and Alberta's natural gas. I mean, this is just the West Coast. You're talking about tungsten from Yukon. I mean, all of these resources and minerals that we have, we should be digging up and exporting. And when people say there's no business case and there's no private sector investment, the reason my government raised over $100 billion in potential investment for just LNG. And all of that private sector investment, I would argue, is still there, waiting to support Canada. The reason it didn't happen is because the prospects for those investments were killed in the night by the new Democratic government in British Columbia and by Justin Trudeau's government in Ottawa. They murdered the LNG industry in Canada. We finally got one through because it was long enough in the process because they couldn't kill it. But 19 proposals and only one of them has come to fruition so far.
We were never building.
I'll give you a chance to respond.
There's no business case because the private sector wanted to invest. The government killed it. The private sector walked away, and now there's no private sector investment. We have to go back and charm the investors and get them back into being interested in Canada.
Nathan, I'll let you respond, and then I'll get Monty's last word.
Yeah, for sure. Total fantasy land that we were going to have a spider's web of LNG pipelines across northern BC, 19 of them, that we had the market or the capacity. Regardless, the NDP did bring in a project that was supported, particularly by the local First Nations and the Haisla, and now there's a second and third. But One thing that Daniel Smith raised, which I think kills investment in Canada, is unpredictability and uncertainty. The talk of Alberta secession, the talk of making it easier for Albertans to pull out of Canada, creates the exact opposite climate that those same investors that we're talking about will run away from, because that's unpredictability, it's uncertainty. So everybody's just we just had an election. Everybody's got to cool their jets a little bit and see what's possible now that we have a new formation that Canadians have given us in a government to try to get some things done. I think the same day she also brought back corporate money into Alberta politics, but I guess that's something else for someone else to deal with. But it just seems to me talking about Canada breaking apart and Alberta walking away is not sending the message that it is a good place to invest. We just need to calm it down, show good regulatory environment, good predictability on permitting, work with First Nations, and be accountable on climate. That's what investors, I'm here in Toronto, that's what investors are asking for, and that's what they're looking for, and not talk of separation and we're going to make demands, and if you don't meet them, we're walking away. I think that's the opposite of what leaders should be doing right now.
Monty, let me ask you about that, because I think in the case of Premier Smith, there's legislation, for example, that's being introduced this week that essentially lowers the bar for when a referendum can be held. She was asked during a press conference today on multiple occasions, is this about separatism? She indicated that polling shows there isn't wide support, but she wouldn't want to prescribe what it be used for. So I think the interpretation is she's not saying no way, no how. Premier Moe in Saskatchewan also said today, I'm a Canadian. I was reading, I believe the Canadian Press reported, but that he would not stand in the way of a vote to separate. I'm in no way discounting feelings of alienation, but does Nathan have a point in that, taking it to that step and not ruling it out as the leaders of those provinces is also irresponsible in the way they are accusing the previous government of being irresponsible on national unity?
No, I don't think so. I think, first of all, this alienation is a real feeling that Albertans feel. They're tired of being disrespected in Canada. It's not necessarily just about moving oil to the coast or getting natural gas to the coast. It's about respect. Alberta makes a major contribution to Confederation. And what do they get for that? They get ignored by the Liberal government for the last 10 years. They get Jonathan Wilkinson, Stephen Guilbeault running down the industry, finding ways to keep oil and gas in the ground as much as they possibly can. And then all of a sudden there's sort of bemusement at the idea that people would feel alienated and that they would not be satisfied with Alberta's place in Confederation. I think Premier Smith is doing the right thing. She's essentially providing a bit of a relief valve for people to either demonstrate that they have support for this or to go back to what they're doing and find another way to show their dismay. But this is a good way, in my mind, for people to say that we're upset about Alberta's place in Confederation, but it's not going to go, frankly, I don't think it'll go anywhere.
Mm-hmm. You just don't hear it from BC. We have lots of Western alienation as well, and we don't clamor every opportunity from our political leaders. I don't think there's a sentiment for Alberta to leave either. I'm just speaking to the very point that, Monty, you were talking about earlier, about creating the investment climate. And I think it's pretty obvious, bringing back notions of lowering the bar, making it easier for people to have a referendum that could lead to eventual separation, and the Premier not really saying this is not our interest, but instead actually threatening it with lists of demands. I just hope that there's a higher calling amongst all of us. Yes, there's frustrations, no kidding. It's a big country. There's a lot of different interests. If you go east to west, north to south, that's fine. But we just had a vote. Let's give the government a shot. Let's see if they can work together with other parties, work together with the provinces. We have a real threat that actually talks about us being Americans south of the border. Let's focus, yeah? Instead
it's up to Mark Carney.
About referendum.
He can address this right now.
30 seconds left. It's all yours, Christy.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, as a British Columbian, I think it's going to be hard for Alberta to hit tidewater if they do actually separate. I mean, let's state the obvious here. But I do think there was some form of a referendum that just happened. It's called a general election. And Albertans made their voice heard very, clearly. They voted almost exclusively for the Conservative Party. Okay, we understand. So I think the issue for Canada now is for Mark Carney to figure out, with some significant numbers of New Democrats in his caucus, bias, how he's going to make sure we rebuild our reputation with overseas, with investors, and how we actually find our way to building more pipelines, more infrastructure, so that Alberta's contribution to the country won't just be recognized, but it will be maximized, and it will do things like save our healthcare system and our education system and all those social programs that are so important to everybody.
Okay, I got to leave it there. It was a great discussion. I imagine it will continue over the next few weeks and months. Thanks so much, Nathan Cullen, Monty Solberg, and Christy Clark, our wonderful front bench. I'm going to take a quick commercial break. After that break, we're going to break down election results, dig into some of the notable voting storylines you may have missed out of the results. Abacus Data CEO David Coletto is my next guest. Stay right there.
Pierre, God bless him, he took the riding for granted, and people don't like to be taken for granted. So I think that opened the door for people to consider a change in Carleton.
Clearly, we need to think about a few things about how we fell short and why we fell. No one's here denying that, but I can tell you that Pierre is staying on. He's fighting. He's gonna work with our caucus.
Everything's negotiable in politics, and one of the things that I'm already thinking about is official party status. That number is arbitrary of 12.
A sampling there of election reaction we've had on this program this week from the Liberals, Conservatives, and NDP. The Liberals are returning to a fourth consecutive mandate, their third minority, but this time strengthened to 168 seats. That's just 4 short of a majority. While the Conservatives picked up 144 seats, the Bloc, NDP, and Greens all saw losses, the NDP losing official party status and remaining, or resulting rather, in just 7 seats. The Liberals also won the popular vote, something the Conservatives have secured the past 2 elections. You can take a look at that popular vote breakdown right there. Here to break down the data that drove those results is David Coletto. He's the founder, chair, and CEO of Abacus Data. Hi, David. Great to see you as always.
Hi, Vashti. Good to see you.
So how much of a swing was the ultimate result in this election from where things were even just at the beginning of this year?
Well, when Justin Trudeau announced his resignation, our poll had the Conservatives ahead by 27 points. So we had them at 47. Wow. So they're down 6 from that high. But the Liberals are up 24 points in the course of just, 3.5, 4 months, right? A remarkable swing. And then you've got the New Democrats who dropped, 12 points. So, huge swings. Like, these are things you almost never see. I can't find really any example around the world, let alone in Canada, where we saw in less than 3-4 months, basically a complete upheaval and swing in public opinion like this before.
I know there's been a lot of chatter around the demographics. I've seen a lot of social media posts that say, like, okay, boomer, to describe why the outcome was what it was. What can you tell us about the way those demographics ultimately landed and how different that is from previous elections?
Well, let's start with the boomers, because I think they were the first really to start moving towards the Liberals. I think they reacted the most negatively to Donald Trump threatening, 51st state and tariffs. And when I went back to our last survey of the 2021 campaign, the Conservatives won men over 60 by 23 points. Based on our last few surveys, they lost that group by 5 points. So the Liberals gained 20 points between the last election and now among that demographic. And so that's one of the key ingredients for this Liberal victory, is that they found a way through, I think, maybe not necessarily any fault of their own, other than Mark Carney really appealed to baby boomers seeking security, and they're the most reliable voters. So that's the best, that's political gold in terms of elections in Canada.
I was looking through, and our team here was sort of crunching the numbers about kind of interesting things that happened below the headline. And one of them is that, Carney was able to win 16 seats. I believe that Trudeau didn't win in any of his 3 elections. Those include 6 in Quebec, 2 in Ontario, being Carleton, Pierre Poilievre's riding in Hamilton Centre, which was a longtime NDP MPs and had been held for decades, I believe, by the NDP. At the same time, he lost 11 seats that Trudeau had won all 3 times, and even another 7 that the Liberals won in 2021. The one that sticks out, the area, is in Ontario. Brampton, Cambridge, Niagara, Kitchener South, like some parts of the 905 and then Southwest Ontario. How significant a shift do you think that is?
I think it's a big shift. I think if you think of, as you said, Brampton, York Region, I think my parents in Richmond Hill are watching right now, their riding flipped from Liberal to Conservative. There was an interesting pattern that where there is a higher proportion of immigrants, the Liberal vote went down and the Conservative vote went up. So, you know, we can't make a perfect correlation, but there seems to be a relationship between those two variables, that something was going on in certain communities, communities with higher proportions of South Asian Canadians, Chinese Canadians, even Italian Canadians in Vaughan Woodbridge. We saw a big swing away from the Liberals to the Conservatives there. And I also think there's something related in that those are affluent parts of the Greater Toronto Area, but they're also folks who are carrying very large mortgages. And we know that one of the things that I think drove the dissatisfaction with the Trudeau government was the rapid increase in interest rates, which wasn't their doing, but was very much blamed on them. And I think these were communities where the cost of living, the price of housing were still big factors, along with, I think, some culturally and socially conservative issues that, like crime as well, that helped the Conservatives get an audience where they hadn't over the last number of elections.
I've just got 30 seconds left, but for you, what's the headline out of the fact that they both won more than 40% of the popular vote? Like, what's the story out of that looking ahead?
I think it's an unprecedented election. I just don't know if it's going to continue. I think we always make, you know, predictions that, oh, here we're now going to be in a two-party race for the rest of time. I think this was such an interesting and unique election. You had two fundamental ballot questions: how to deal with Trump, delivering change, and the New Democrats, and for some extent the Bloc, just got squeezed out of both of those and weren't left with anything. And so, you know, I think that headline is just a remarkable outcome, and I think going to be one of those elections. You tell your grandkids that you covered, because we're going to talk about it the same way that we've heard that, you know, that 1988 free trade election being talked about up until now.
Yeah, makes total sense. David, thanks as always. Appreciate the analysis. David Coletto is the founder and CEO of Abacus Data. We're back in a moment. And there is lots more coming up tonight on CTV News Channel. Hope you can stay with us and have a wonderful evening.